I've walked with people in the past and like, yeah, but I just like, I'm not feeling it. Or they're trying to achieve a spiritual high that they once created. And it's like, if you would just commit yourself to the motions and just trust that the Lord is doing more than you realize, that you will be better for it, and that the kingdom will be better for it, and that the church will be better for it.
It's one of those things to where when we lean into just being obedient, whether we feel like it or not, we can know that God is doing something.
All right, so here we go. Part 2 of our best attempt.
Part 2 of the seminar day with all of the other pastors that we found ourselves surrounded by.
Yeah, and James K. Smith, philosophy professor at Calvin University, talking about his book, talking about a lot of the concepts from his book on how to inhabit time, understanding the past, facing the future, and living faithfully now.
Yeah, and we, throughout this seminar, the main topic, the discussion was, when are we? And so the first podcast, the first session of that day was discussing all about the temptations that we as Christians have to wrestle through and in all reality overcome, trying to preserve the past, or thinking that God wasn't moving in the past, or even the idea that time in and of itself, God isn't doing anything with it. We're just in it as we wait for glory. Yeah. When in all reality, that is not at all. We are, in fact, creatures of time. Jesus himself entered into time to meet us in our space that was created for us. And so today, at this point in time, we are continuing that conversation. That was about a 30,000-foot view in that first that part 1 of this podcast, of this conversation. Now we're diving in a little bit deeper into how do we reconcile with our past? How do we reconcile other people's past? We all have had different experiences, how we came to the Lord, how we became saved, how we put our faith in Jesus. But even after we place our faith in Jesus, the way that we get fed, the way that we grow is different. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in this podcast.
Yeah, and how to be at peace with where you are in this. Right. I wrote down here, where you are affects when you are in time. Your place, right? Your proximity. And so like for us, Napoleon, Ohio. So all of the history, we're living in the where is Napoleon. Yeah. So that actually affects the when we are in time. What are we doing here for the kingdom of God? What is it? And he gave this maybe extreme analogy at the beginning of this second session of what it looks like to grow in the tropic versus what it looks like to grow in the Arctic.
And how trees exist in both places, whether we recognize it or not. But the way that the sun hits the earth and the way that the sun feeds these trees is different.
Yeah, because he shared that they get similar amounts of sunlight, but it's when the sun comes.
Right, and the amount of sun and the concentration of the sun. And all of a sudden we recognize that if you're in the tropics, you're going to have a consistent day in, day out, repeatable pattern of the sun just coming and shining. And it's going to be a certain duration of time every single day. Yeah. But then you go up to the Arctic, and there are long seasons where the sun just is not shining. Time moves forward. Time is still going through in the same way that it's for the tropics, but where the sun is, there is nothing feeding those trees. There's nothing feeding vegetation in the Arctic. But then all of a sudden, after these long winters of no sun, all of a sudden, boom, the sun is there and it does not leave. Hyper concentration. And the temptation for us as Christians is how are we looking at our past? How are we looking at where we're at and determining, am I supposed to be a tropical tree, a tropical Christian where I'm just getting fed in a repeatable pattern? Or am I going through this long duration where there is no hard sun and I'm going to have to bear through this long, harsh winter?
I want to read this quote that he shared with us by Barry Lopez in the book Arctic Dreams. It says, "Trees in the Arctic have an aura of implacable endurance about them. A cross-section of the bowl of a Richardson willow no thicker than your finger may reveal 200 annual growth rings beneath the magnifying glass. Much of the tundra, of course, appears to be treeless, when in many places it is actually covered with trees, a thick matting of sort, ancient willows and birches, and you realize suddenly that you're wandering on top of a forest. As a pastor, I think sometimes, if we go back to the question of where we are affects when you are in time, we have a tendency sometimes, or as Christians, to look at the fruit in someone's life, look at the height, the breadth of the tree, right? And we say, man, that is a person of faithfulness. Well, look at the conditions that they were in, right? Versus someone who is just weathered the storm in their life and have bared it and have grown nonetheless. And a lot of times visually, we just want to make different assumptions or presumptions.
I have absolutely fallen into that temptation in my young ministry. I'm looking at someone and I'm wondering, you've been here for 24 years, because we can talk about where as being Napoleon, but even that, it can get more specific. I was very fortunate to be raised inside of a very healthy church, this church, with a family that desired to grow. I was in a very tropical environment when it comes to the spiritual conditions. But there are those, even though they may attend this church, when they leave this building, the environments they walk into, maybe for the last 2 decades, 3 decades, it is not this tropical environment.
I even think of, my wife in the education system. So she's a teacher, and you have students in your class, right, that all come from different environments, different wheres.
Exactly.
Right? And so you're teaching them the same stuff, but when they go home, some of them go home to a home with 2 parents. It's stable. They're super intentional about their child's education. They work with them, right? There are not many barriers to entry. They're growing. Where another child, let's take it to the other extreme, living could be in the foster care system, could be jumping around, could not even know where their next meal is coming from, let alone what math facts are. Right. And so they're taken back into other environments of the Arctic.
That's exactly right. And when we think about Christians, when we think about those who are attending this church, it's going to be even harder. Imagine when you're answering the question, when? Some people don't even find the sun until they're 18 years old, 25 years old, 30, 40, 50 years old. How they're going to receive that sun is going to be different than those who are receiving the sun since the day that they were born. And so all of a sudden, you have to take all of this into play when you're analyzing, when you're looking at, well, why aren't they? Why aren't they more fruitful? Or even more so, the comparison of like, why can't I be like the person who has grown so big and strong?
And there you have it, comparison. You said it. Because so often, even in my own life, I want to define it by my own limitations. You can have a growing frustration and focus on the things that you don't have, where limitations actually could be a mercy and a grace of God that give us focus into living and leaning into what He has for me in my life.
Right. I wish so badly that the Lord had gifted me with this gifting of administration and organization and this leadership style that can just move forward at a pace that is just crazy. And I know men like that. I am not one of those Christian men who can lead and organize and administrate and do all of these things. And I get caught up because I'm like, wait a minute, how could I ever truly live into my own leadership style when I'm missing this part? And you just said it. But the Lord has gifted you in other areas. He's given you other tools. He's given you other experiences and opportunities that have shaped and molded you. Why would you want all of these things when God is He's using your experiences, He's using your past to mold you into a way like, hey, here's your focus. Here's the focus I have for you in this moment.
Yeah, and so in the midst of our focus, we see what we are handed down, our past, our set of circumstances, and then through that time and what we trust God to work out then the hope that's before us and what we're called into, right? And it gives us a focus. It gives us sets our sights towards what the Lord wants to do then.
And, I loved what he was talking about because he uses his own life. James K. Smith, he was talking about how he didn't become a Christian until he was 18 years old. And he went to what he would call, and this is his word, he went to a podunk Bible college in Iowa, which allowed us to make fun of Chip for just a brief moment.
Yeah, of course.
But he goes to this podunk Bible college in Iowa, and that formed part of his pedigree.
Yeah.
And so here he is, this brilliant man, highly intellectual, and he's looking at all these other professors. He's looking at all these other men and women who have gone before him that are teaching in these prestigious schools, maybe have higher rankings and all of these other things. And he's wondering, well, man, if I had their pedigree, if I had been raised in this environment, doing all of these things, having traveled all of these places, then I too would be teaching at these places, writing these amazing books that are being published all over the world. But the fact is, and this is what he had to reconcile with, that's not the focus that he is being called into.
That's not his story.
That's not his story. That's not what God had in store for his story.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we embrace our horizon of possibilities.
But that's difficult to do.
Reconcile, when we can come to peace, when we can come to terms with living into our story and a commitment to do that this is my call, and that I live into this and I don't have to live into that.
Right.
And I was created for this.
And it's freeing once you get there.
Yeah.
But getting there is a process that takes sanctification. And he mentioned this as well. There are moments in time where he is just envious, that he has coveted someone else's pedigree, their past, their raising up, if you will. Yeah. And I can easily fall into that temptation of like, wow, I wish I would have had all of those experiences because that would have then trained me to do all these other things. But he was talking about, to search or to go running after the story that God has not prepared for you is to run out of the story that God has in store for you.
Yeah, and Paul learned to fully embrace this, right? The Apostle Paul, he had a past probably that he could have allowed shame to overcome, but he understood the role of grace in it, right? And he understood that his past kind of made him who he was. Yeah. And that's not it's to sanctify the past. It's not to be permissive to the evil that had been done or to say, this evil was actually good. No. It's to say, though, despite that.
And doesn't that talk about the love of God and the sovereignty of God? A God who can take one's past, full of the mistakes and flaws and brokenness, and not justify the evil, but he can redeem the evil. Yeah. He then gives value to our past by saying, hey, I'm going to make you new. I'm not going to erase it. I'm not going to eradicate your past, but I'm going to redeem your past in such a way that it's going to be the very thing that molds you and shapes you into who I need you to be or who I desire you to be to keep pushing my kingdom forward.
Yeah, I've created you into a new thing that's a resurrection. Right? It's not a reset.
Your past is being raised to life, being given new value, being made new. But that doesn't mean that we can just say, well, I forget it. I am erasing it.
So we come out of this brokenness. We meet Christ. We are reborn. We are adopted. And he says, how do we know that it's a resurrection and how to reset? It's the scars.
It was a beautiful image.
Beautiful image. Yeah. It's the scars. Yeah. It's our scars and how we talk about this in week 2 of the growth track, where we say, hey, how the Lord uses our pain for his glory. Yeah. And how we are, Ephesians 2 talks about a workmanship, a poem, a work of art of the Lord, and how he can use. There's a certain, I hope my wife doesn't listen to this, because where the...
No, don't say that. She's one of our 4 listeners.
There's an art form that they put broken pots back together with gold.
Okay.
And it actually is more beautiful than the original piece.
Oh, that is beautiful.
And it's an imagery of what God can do with broken things. Yeah. And as he brings those together, can just make something beautiful. And you see where the brokenness was and where the breaks were.
I love that image because it replaces that gold with the grace of God.
Yeah.
What the grace of God can do with broken pieces that have been shattered all throughout the life, and how he can redeem it and give it value. But again, it suggests that, our past actually is important. It is not for us to completely push under the rug or to try to hide. I know Christians today, they don't glorify the sin and the evil of their past, but they talk about it in such a way to demonstrate how the Lord has entered into their lives and made a new creation without erasing it, but by using it.
Yeah, no, I love it. So this blank slateism, I think you mentioned that at youth group. Did you say that?
Yeah, we talked about this last night, even with our youth group. But hey, all these kids, like there's this temptation to fall into guilt, into shame, saying, my past, I've made mistakes, Justin, and I don't want to remember those. I don't want to bring those into my relationship with Christ. And I'm like, no. What you forget is that God is so powerful and he's so loving. He can use and does use your past in order to make you into the person he needs you to be.
Yeah, E.M. Forster writes that we must be willing to let go of the life we had planned then. And so let's talk about this. So as to have the life that is waiting for us.
Yes. So often, I mean, this is that proverb. We can plan our steps all we want, but it's the Lord who establishes where we take those steps. Yeah. But again, we desire certain things. And it takes a lot to simply let go and say, all right, God, my life is yours. Take me where you want to be. And oftentimes, we look to, I know for myself, how awesome would it be to be the guy who writes that amazing book, or to have that one conference that just changes lives. And it can be tempting, like, how can I go running after this? But if God's not in it, then not only will I miss out on the life that I so desire, I will miss out on what God would have for me to do in this very moment.
And through these mercies that the Lord reveals to us in our pain, right? He brings us through those, and he allows us to maybe let go a little bit of the plans that we had for ourselves, to fully embrace the life that was before us, knowing that he's going to use that brokenness.
It brings to mind a book. Sheldon Van Auken writes this book. It's called A Severe Mercy. And it's a love story, but you know from the very beginning that his wife dies. And it's a true story of how he came to Christ. And him and his wife, they were deeply in love with one another, but she ended up coming to faith before he did. And her life then became all about Christ. And she was more in love with Christ than she was with him. And there was a certain, if I remember correctly, there's a certain resentment that came along with this, that Christ ruined the bubble that he had planned for his life. It was supposed to be him and his wife, and Christ enters in and takes his wife away. Not because of death, but because all of a sudden his wife was more in love with Jesus, and that was not the life that he had planned for him. And eventually his wife comes down with a sickness, and she ends up passing away, and he becomes bitter and angry. But what happened was that suffering became a severe mercy of God, and how God was able to use that suffering to draw Sheldon to himself. And all of a sudden, when we recognize that our past, our pains, whatever is causing confusion and turmoil and chaos in our life, God is wanting to use that, because it's through our suffering that we begin to experience his goodness in ways we otherwise would not have.
Yeah, and we know that there's different seasons to life, right? Different seasons that the Lord is at work, and what is he doing in each and every season. And you know, John 16, Jesus's words. I've been just thinking about these over the last couple of months as we're preparing to walk through Gospel of John. And he says, many things I have to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. And how it's his mercy that allows us to just walk with him step by step in the next thing that he has for us. And if you would have told me 15 years ago, all I wanted to know 15 years ago was the plans that God had for me, right? I just want to know your plan for my life, your will for my life, and I want to lean into it. It would have broken me. It would have, because I could not have handled the weight. I couldn't bear it now. You
would have been like a little plastic cup beside a fire hydrant trying to gather water.
Yeah, and that's the same that way that I feel today for the next 15 years now. Is I'm like, Lord, I don't need to know. I don't want to know. I just trust in your providence and your provision. And all I'm going to say is yes to the day. And I'm going to say yes to the next thing that you have me do. And I'm just going to trust that you are walking in this.
And that's freeing.
It is.
It's freeing, but it's difficult because each day comes with new temptations of wanting to take back control, wanting to take back, saying, I need the answers and I need the answers now. So we try to manipulate our circumstances. We try to manipulate how our past comes into play, how our present is interacting with our past. When all God wants is for us to just take one step closer to him each and every day, following him, growing in our reliance on him.
Because the reality is, our understanding of things, our just kind of comprehension, it kind of comes after the fact.
Yeah.
Right?
It's hindsight.
Yeah. And I would say not that it's 2020, right? Because we only remember.
No, right.
But the totality of what he was maybe doing and how he worked things out, there's a little more clarity there, but it's after we've walked through it.
Yeah, and James Smith, he uses this quote, and all of us pastors were sitting there, and he says this quote from GWF Hagel, and it says, "The owl of Minerva only flies at dusk." You're just wondering, what in the world are we talking about? The owl of Minerva only flies at dusk. Well, if we dive into it, and if I can just have a little bit of freedom here, and all throughout history, what is the one animal that's been associated with wisdom? Well, it's the owl. But owls are nocturnal animals, and to a certain extent, what's happening here is, and I'm not going to get into Minerva or anything of this nature, but my understanding of this is that we must go throughout the day before wisdom takes hold, before wisdom begins flying within ourselves. And essentially what it's saying is we need to walk through the experiences that go before us. We need to experience all that the day has for us. And then and only then does the wisdom of that experience begin to take hold, that we can begin flying with that wisdom. But so often at dawn, rather than dusk, at dawn before the day started, we want to be like, well, I have the answers for the day. That's not the case. Yeah. We need to walk through the day. And how often in pastoral ministry do we see that take place?
And let's talk about reflection. I'm walking through this 90-day journey with some men.
Yeah.
And it's called a nightly examination, where you pause and you walk through a series of questions about the day, of how you had walked with the Lord, some things that you're cataloging what the Lord did in your day.
Yeah, I love that.
Right? And
I love that.
In the evening, we were reflecting back on what God did. How was he at work? Where did I see him? Where might he have been working that I missed it? And how can I lean more fully then into tomorrow?
Right. And this is beautiful because you've walked through the experience. You've walked through the day. When I was an undergrad, I had a pastor once tell me, he's like, you need to do more practicing of the highs and lows. And we hear that and we think, oh, that's a child's exercise of tell me about the good points of the day, tell me about the bad points. And really what he was saying was you need to be able to analyze and look back on the different seasons of your life, understand where were the highs? Where did the Spirit just excite you and move you and you were just on fire? And then where were the low points? Where did you not do well in following after God? And like you said, you catalog that and you begin to have this greater understanding of how the Holy Spirit is moving in your life. But you have to walk through it before you can start putting words to it. You can't have a high and a low before you actually experience a high and a low. Yeah. So you need to walk through it, and it's only then does the experience lead to the wisdom, the hindsight, granted not 2020, the hindsight of what God was doing, which gives you an insight of what he is doing, and it allows you to have faith and hope saying what he will continue to do.
Yeah. And so then we move into the different seasons of life and what they mean. And for me, I wrote a lot of notes about this because this is literally the season that I'm in. It's called Seasons of Focal, okay, where the priorities are shaped by the season that you're in. And he said it complicates it when you're in two seasons of focal.
Sure.
So for me, I wanted to raise my hand because, moving into we call it the profession, right? Moving into a new role in my profession and learning new rhythms and the workload and what's demanded of me, my priorities are shaped by my season. I'm focused on that. But then I take the quick 5-minute drive home, and now the season of focal of 3 young children at home. Yeah. And I'm in 2 of these seasons right now where every moment of my day is my priorities are shaped around the season that I'm in, whether it's a young family at home that I'm trying to pour myself into, that I'm trying to care for, that I'm trying to focus, or whether it's a new role in the context of the church that needing to care for a flock and a people and leading and learning to lead well. And that's just where I'm at right now.
And you don't have the freedom necessarily to then begin going beyond your seasons of focal.
Right.
You don't have that freedom because you need to be so incredibly in the zone with where you're at. And maybe later on, so you don't have the freedom of comparing yourself saying, well, why can't I be like so-and-so? Why can't I be like so-and-so? Because the seasons that you are in require you to only be here. Yeah. Now, later on, maybe there will come seasons to where there's your agency of freedom will widen. But right now, you have to be so in the zone. Right. You cannot think about anything else. I think of like the pitcher on a mound. It's in the 9th inning, and you don't have the freedom of thinking what you're going to do after the game because you got 2 outs, and you know that you have to save the game with this, and you have to be in the zone. It's just you and the catcher.
Yeah, right. Because I think 10 years from now, Lord willing, if I'm in the same, it's not going to be a season of focal. It'll be a different rhythm. For me, because I'll have gotten miles, right? Empty nesting is a different season where, it's just, you're not defined by the season that you're in, but there's agency within that season.
That's exactly right.
To maybe ask the Lord what he might want to do within the ebbs and flows of that season. And like you said, there's more agency there. The last couple of years, my word's been focus. And so I just really gravitated with what he shared with that, that these seasons require discernment sometimes, that they require there's seasons of reckoning, right? Where things in the past that we've buried in order to move forward, you just can't push them down anymore. I was talking to someone yesterday, and there's marital issues, and it's the same thing that keeps coming up over and over. And eventually there will be a season of reckoning where for us to move forward, we have to walk through this.
You do.
Together.
Yeah, and it goes back to your sermon that you had this analogy. You can't just keep on avoiding the storm. Eventually, you have to allow the Spirit to take you through the storm. But if you are trying to avoid the storm, you're going to avoid what the Spirit wants to do for you and through you in that time. Yeah,
and let's remove maybe feelings from this. I think that's we've touched on this in the past, and just the kind of the roller coaster of the feeling versus what God is actually doing. And I think of the spiritual disciplines or the spiritual formation or whatever you want to call it. And, I've walked with people in the past and but I just I'm not feeling it. Or they're trying to achieve a spiritual high that they once created. And it's like, if you would just commit yourself to the motions and just trust that the Lord is doing more than you realize, that you will be better for it, and that the kingdom will be better for it, and that the church will be better for it.
It's one of those things to where when we lean into just being obedient, whether we feel like it or not, we can know that God is doing something. Even though we don't feel it. I may not feel good eating my vegetables as a young child, but I can still know that these vegetables are going to be good for me. I'll have people come to me and I don't understand the Bible. I didn't feel like reading the Bible. It was boring. But the fact that we are engaging with the Bible is it's an opportunity for God just to work in us. We know that Scripture in and of itself is a living, breathing document that's sharper than any two-edged sword, the book of Hebrews tells us. And when we engage with it, whether or not we feel like it, whether we got this big aha moment or anything, we know that our act of obedience was an invitation and an allowance of God to do a work upon our lives.
You can read something and you just know that's not for today.
It's not for today.
That's for another day, and I'm going to need that.
And it's going to be cataloged. Whether you try to or not, but it's going to come back to you. And and as you keep on doing that, as you keep on taking those one step closer and closer and closer and engage more and more with God, He is faithful, and He will bring it back and make it have value.
How to inhabit time, James K. Smith. This has been a fun conversation, and as we've kind of welcomed you guys all into the processing and with this has been fun.